Uh, Good morning, everybody. Here's Maura Prile Zanetti, Clough, Hawaii, San Francisco. First of all, I want to apologize for some technical issues. As we can see, even from here, it can happen. And anyways, let me introduce you to our guest today, Sandra Miller, CEO at Runaway Innovation Hub. Sandra, please, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Mauro. Thank you,
Welcome.
everyone.
Welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. And at least we are here to listen to you. And let's start from telling our audience what Runaway does and who you are, what you do. Can you tell
Sure.
us?
Yeah, absolutely. So we think of Runway as an innovation company that accelerates the success of global tech innovators and entrepreneurs. As you mentioned, we're located in San Francisco. We're actually in the Twitter building, and in COVID mode. Um, we really have two primary activities. We do have beautiful co-working space, um, and we have corporate innovation. We have a corporate innovation consulting group, which is really at least half of our business. And um, the we also have beautiful event space at Runway. And so when we're not in COVID, we tend to have a lot of really cool events at Runway. And so as many people have, since COVID, those have shifted online. But we really focus primarily on the startup side, where we tend to work mostly with B2B startups. They tend to at least be far enough along where they've probably raised at least some seed funding before they're becoming a Runway member. And on the corporate side, we work with the Global 2000 corporates and really help them wherever they are on their, if you will, their innovation journey. And different companies have different challenges, so we do a wide array of things to help them really accelerate, as I mentioned, their success with their innovation strategies. And with our corporate innovation, we really focus on helping them get to results. Some of corporate innovation can be kind of fluffy, and we really tend to focus on best practices, for example, for startup engagement, for curating a relevant ecosystem around them, for thinking about how to manage things internally, how to structure things internally so that they can more effectively engage with startups, which takes a fair bit of effort. So we're really, we are a smaller shop, but we work in a more hands-on, sort of bespoke way with our corporate clients, and really have a great track record of helping them achieve their objectives.
Cool. Thank you. So you have a one location in San Francisco, or are you connected to other somewhere else?
Yes, we have one location, and we have really been here. We're one of the in San Francisco, at least. We've been around a fairly long time, since 2013, and we've had more than 400 companies all told. We're actually doing an analysis of that right now. And just as an example, from a subset of our companies, around 332, for example, they've raised collectively more than $3 billion in funding They've created more than 16,000 jobs. There have been, I think it's 52 exits out of those 332 companies. So pretty good success rate with companies that have been members at Runway over the years.
Oh, that's very cool to hear. I mean, you're saying more than 300 companies collecting more than 3 billion and
Correct.
52 exits.
Yes.
That's very cool. Congrats.
Yeah, thank
So,
you.
yeah, a lot of things come to my mind to ask you. Like, for
Hmm.
example, you were saying mainly you deal with B2B startups,
Yes.
and at the same time, you bridge them with corporations. Is that correct?
That's correct. And one thing to understand is, we're kind of obsessed about really helping both startups and corporates improve their ability to understand, evaluate, and engage with each other. And so certainly we, as we're working with our corporate clients, as there are opportunities, we absolutely connect them with startups that are, our members. But one of the things about Runway is that we don't take equity in any of our member companies, which means for our corporate clients, we can be very objective, and we see our job is, after we get
Yeah.
them really ready to engage with startups, they know what their, they know what their criteria are. They are ready to make a, if they find a great startup, they're ready to do something, or at a minimum, they're managing and being a little bit more transparent about their timeline to actually pull the trigger, for example, on a proof of concept study or something like that. But we see our job is to find the best startups, no matter where they are, for a particular client's needs. So we certainly don't limit ourselves to only companies that are Runway members. And and the good news is that we've had both corporate as well as even CVC clients, and we have a nice track record of helping those CVC, corporate venture capital teams, find startups that even their own investment associates didn't come across, and that have resulted in them making investments. And we're actually going to be coming out with a case study of our work over about 3.5 years in finding several startups with a particular corporate venture capital group. So we'll let you know about that and share that case study when it's out.
Oh, that would be nice. And that's very awesome. I mean, you're really bridging and creating an ecosystem of virtues, connecting all these kind of dots of the research and the economy and the market. So, what about the scenario we are all in at this time of the year after
Yeah,
9 months of COVID-19? I mean, everyone is eager to understand better lessons learned from here,
sure.
Silicon Valley, San Francisco. Because as you know, this is the Premier League of the VC planet and startups. But from time to time, we hear kind of the profundis,
Hmm.
like there's always somebody saying, "Oh, it's over. This is the end," and so on. And on the same time, um, we know from history, just to give a look back to, because today mainly people are confused, of course, in Europe, in the US, all over the world. But if we look at the latest big crisis, the 2008, 2009
Hmm.
financial crisis, not to mention the beginning of 2000s with the dot com
Right.
bubble. But what we can see is that while a lot of companies and corps, just startups, uh, finished their journey, and in the 2008 2009 crisis, um, some new ones hit the ground. Like,
Right.
just to mention a few, Airbnb.
Right.
That was the timing. And look what happened now. We are in 2020. They just went IPO. Working for that. They're trying to reinvent themselves because it took them like a decade to disrupt the hospitality industry. But then overnight, a virus shut down all countries, a market for them. But now they're trying to reinvent them. Can you give us some kind of, let's say, the state of the tech scene now here, if we can learn something?
Um, so first of all, the Kauffman Foundation, which is the world's biggest foundation focused on innovation and entrepreneurship, in 2009 they did a study of of the list of the top 500 fastest growing companies, the Fortune 500 basically, and that they looked at companies going back to, I think it was the late 1800s, and then they looked at different periods, pre and post World War I, World War II, etc. So high level in that study, one of their conclusions is that half of the companies that are currently, more than half actually, 51%, that were in 2009 on the Fortune 500 list, began during a recession or a bear market or both. So yes, so these challenging economic times spark, often by necessity. If you've lost your job, you have to maybe create one, and this is borne out for centuries, right? The thing that's interesting about beyond that, so this is when they, I just talked about when they started, but starting a company is one thing, but what about survival, right? How long did those some companies survive? So of that data set, it turns out that the survival trend lines remain remarkably the same, whether the firm whether the company started in a bear market, a recession, or a bull market. And it turns out that just about 49% is the survival rate at 5 years after founding, regardless of whether it's a good economy or a less good economy.
Wow.
So I think that's pretty, in some ways, that's pretty encouraging. And so yes, times like we're in, even as wild as they are certainly a reasonable time to start a company. And I don't have the current filings for companies in Delaware. That'd be interesting to look at for 2020 so far. But I'm sure we're seeing an uptick in some ways. And Airbnb is a really interesting example. So I think if you looked at Airbnb maybe 4 years ago, they did this amazing thing, right? Because they owned, they own no hotels, they own no buildings, and yet they achieved sort of a valuation and growth that exceeded, a legacy global hotel company like Hyatt.
Yeah.
And they achieved that in less than a decade. And so yes, COVID has certainly been a rude awakening for them, but I'm sort of betting on them, right? I think they will figure out a way to come, to come through this, and and I think that sort of speaks to something about Silicon Valley, and Mauro, I know in your work, you go all around the world, and you sort of are one of those people who is a bridge and helps people understand and navigate Silicon Valley, and I've been doing that myself, frankly, for the past couple of decades, as and working at
Wow.
places like Stanford and elsewhere, and because and I grew up here in Silicon Valley, and one of the things that, as you meet with people who come from outside, whether it's outside, Silicon Valley, they could be American, and just, this is a very different kind of place. And one of the things that is hard for people to understand about it is Silicon Valley is much more than a place. It's a mindset, and it really does have a history of reinventing itself, because I mean, this Silicon Valley originally was called the Valley of Heart's Delight, because the soil here, particularly on the peninsula, was so incredible that it's why we had all these orchards and amazing agriculture here. And then, before it was Silicon Valley, it was
Orchard.
really a hub for the defense industry. And then the
Wow.
defense industry, a bunch of that business moved to Southern California and elsewhere. And so then you're like, oh, well, what's going to happen? Well, and then you have, the genesis of Silicon Valley and all those elements, the universities, people coming
Yeah.
from the East Coast out here. And so it's always been reinventing itself. I mean, it blew itself up in the .com, right? And then we had, a variety of things combined for the Great Recession in 2008. And yet here we are. And so I think that there's definitely still a role for Silicon Valley to play. And that said, I think it's always good to um, have awareness for the fact that the barriers to entry for somebody to start a company are increasingly getting lower in a lot of ways. And so I think it's important for example, for investors from Silicon Valley to be very mindful that there are a lot of great companies all over the country, all over the world, and so it doesn't just have to be from Silicon Valley. So anyway, those are just a few thoughts on that for context.
Well, thank you so much. They are great thoughts, actually, that let me think and spin my mind on many, many ideas and things. So the takeaway you're saying is basically, uh, um, this is not a place for nostalgia. I mean, it's not about we were. You're saying, you know, first it was a hub for defense. It was also a world of orchards. Then the silicon as element came the beginning of 70s, and you know um, the world was totally disrupted, and now it was called Silicon Valley. And then the 2000 crisis, the first .com, and then 2008. But now you still pointed now that the very common thing with this area in 1 century basically has been one only: reinventing
Yes,
itself,
yes,
keeping on going to redesign, reimagining everything. And of course, it's hard, as you said, it's a heart awakening for everybody, but
yeah. and
it's
and I think it's important to understand. Okay, maybe probe a little bit, because if you're not from here, it's like, okay, what's the secret sauce? Why does this happen here? Why is that, why is Silicon Valley, quote, special in that way? And I was listening a few days ago to a 2016 TEDx talk from a South African woman, and this was in South Africa. And she was talking about her entrepreneurial journey. And one of the things that she spoke of was how in South Africa, even with all of her accomplishments at that time, she was, very academically, well-trained academically, and already had, some local success in business. So she was a phenom, and yet when she shared her dream of, how she wanted to grow her company, she had a lot of people around her in her hometown, if you will, just telling her, why, you're successful here. Why do you need to, grow bigger and so forth? And so it really took a lot for her to sort of break through all of the people around her, and be bold enough to apply to a high-profile competition in the U.S. And she and her co-founder got in, and and now in 2020, she's an investor based in San Francisco and investing, in companies that also have some societal benefit. And so it's that, and that is frankly a pretty common thing that I think we in Silicon Valley don't take for granted a bit. Is one of the reasons that Silicon, when I talk about this mindset, is that there's the belief, that you can do big things. And also there is the tolerance for failure. And there are many stories of people rising from failure, and the degree to which the Silicon Valley mindset really appreciates failure, and the experiences that you gain from failure. At some point then you have to break through and and hopefully learn from that and apply it and then be successful. But a lot of other places you have a failure and you're done, or at least you feel like that. I think one of the other sort of, go ahead, Mauro.
No, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Okay. One other thing that in my work with entrepreneurs from outside the U.S., that I was really struck, because I'd see them come back every 3-4 months to Silicon Valley, and I'd ask them why, and they told me that they can get more done here in a week than in a month back home. And that really goes to the fact that Silicon Valley is oriented to do business with startups, and in particular, one of the secret sauces that makes all that work is the law firms here, and the fact that you can, as a startup, with a high quality law firm, and even before you have funding in some cases, right? It's not unusual to get deferred terms as you sign an engagement letter with the law firm. So those things, I haven't seen that many ecosystems outside the US yet really put that piece in particular together. That's a tough one, for a tough way to change the way of doing business. I hope that that is definitely a tip, that if you're looking, considering different ecosystems in the world to base your startup, you really want to focus on, do they have what are the law firms like, and what are they, and what is their willingness to work with startups. that's definitely something to look at on your checklist.
Thank you. That I think you definitely nail it. Like listing two, three aspects that really make the difference with Silicon Valley compared to the rest of the world. The culture of of failure. I mean, like it's not a big sin. It's not like you're over, but some kind of a gear to go to the next, to shift to a next level of yourself. And also, when you say it's not just a place, you remind me something I heard in person from one of uh, the guys of Silicon Valley in terms of big law firms like Larry Sonsini
Mm-hmm.
himself years ago. He said it's more a state of the mind, which is this kind of mindset. It's not just
Mm-hmm.
the place, and this means it's people and it's ideas and the way ideas flow in a great kind of spatial networking because you can easily show up and pitch your idea, your big problem and your solution to that big problem and making the whole engine work. And also, as you're saying, many startups, since you deal with a lot of them, they tell you that definitely they come back because they feel that they can make things happen in 1 week rather than in 3, 4 months or even years. And to go back to the very first example you kindly shared about these TEDx, about this
Yeah.
entrepreneur, I didn't get the name. Did you say the name of her?
No,
Uh,
no.
okay, okay. The South. I mean, she's from South Africa, but now
Yeah,
she moved here in
yeah,
San Francisco, and the fact that at one point she had all around her life, I guess, from family to friends to her business network. Why you want to try? What you're daring to go that bigger? Are you sure? So it's always about leaving kind of a certainty to seize an idea into the uncertainty. But she
yeah,
did it, and
yeah. It's
so
interesting. Another successful Australian um, business owner told me that it's there. They call it the tall poppy syndrome. If you're bold enough to sort of stand tall and take a, make a big move, then people around you will sort of lop off the top of the poppy, just be, that's sort of their culture because you're trying to set yourself above others. And, I think that it, this is, this is an interesting, the cultural differences in doing business, and I mean this in the most respectful way. There are some cultures where, it is, they want to see you multiple times as they get to know you, and before they'd even consider,
yeah,
starting to negotiate something with you. And so in Silicon Valley, number one, there's this hyper efficient network to due diligence on and check on other people. And people do, but it just happens very quickly. Because the biggest currency I think people in Silicon Valley consider is time. And so when
yeah,
someone's giving you, time to hear about your idea, you want to be really respectful of that. And also, if they're interested, they want to get moving typically to figure out, okay, can we do a deal? And that can happen more quickly. Um,
hmm,
and and that sort of bursts these cultural norms in in many other places around the world, where that's just not how it's done. And so I think that's, there's some interesting trade-offs, and it's just another, aspect of doing things in Silicon Valley versus other places that is important to understand in the mix.
That's very interesting. Very, very interesting. So you were saying the poppy syndrome about
Yeah,
these Australian
tall
poppy.
poppy.
Sorry?
The tall poppy syndrome.
Tall
For
poppy syndrome.
yeah.
Yeah, this reminds me some kind of saying from Italy that you like. It's like being the giant. The they accept, let's say, to be a giant amongst dwarves. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
so that's another big point because actually, this is the opposite. It's not about the tallness, or it's about what's your idea.
Yeah.
What are you gonna make it happen or not? It's not about I'm better, I'm worst, or so. This is very cool. And what is a guideline that you could share with startuppers today, considering the reality we are into? Can you give us a guideline? Like, is this the right time to come over here and try their adventure, or what? What is it?
Yeah, I think, one of the things I always say to a startup is, I mean, be in the best place for where you need to be now with your startup, and be thinking about, and working towards if there's somewhere else in the world, where it could be a better place to build your startup. For example, and the good news is if you're doing, a digital or software based business, you can practically work anywhere in the world. So
Yeah,
early on, it may make a ton of sense to stay where you are if your cost of living is reasonable, um, given the early stage nature of your company. And at a certain point, you have to, I mean, maybe you don't. It just depends on the funding strategy. I mean, one aspect is the funding strategy. If maybe you don't need to raise a lot of funding, um, and you can sort of fund your business ultimately, um, through serving customers. But maybe to get started for the first 6 months or a year, you're working on your business at night after you've done your quote day job. I think it is, it's interesting. I think the more that you can plan, to and get your bank account prepped, to be in a, to be so that you can be ready to be all in your company, the better you are. The truth is, Mauro, that sometimes entrepreneurs, they just have such a burning, passion for this idea to make whatever it is into a business, that
yeah,
despite, the best, most practical advice, they can't do anything but just jump all in to their company. And that, that's just part of the reality of startups. So if that's your case, at least you want to sort of manage that risk, and the elements of that risk, as much as possible. So how else will you mitigate that? Another way to fund, early on, your idea is even through, putting together, maybe you and your co-founder can do some consulting, and you can do enough consulting so you guys can, you both can pay for, your living, your basic necessities, and split your day into 50%, 50%, and 50%, right? And really support yourselves maybe half time, and then the rest of your time work on your company. But there's a lot of things to do before you're making that leap. As we have entrepreneurial sort of methodologies that are really smart things to do, like validate your idea, test your assumptions about whether people want what your product or service. Get out there early and test that. Have conversations. Expose your idea. And again, that can be a drawing on a piece of paper for how it will work, right? And just to be able to have those early conversations to test your hypothesis about why people want it, what they might pay for it, what problem, do they actually have the problem that you think you're solving? All of those, core aspects of the lean startup methodology. The first two phases of lean are really, really customer discovery and customer validation. They're really good. And one of the things that's pretty interesting is even entrepreneurs who've been successful, maybe they're on their third company, there can be a lot of resistance to exposing your new raw idea to others, and it is one of the smartest things that you can do. I think the other thing that I'm just seeing all these entrepreneurs that have told me about their mistakes, and the other thing that they sort of can lament is that they don't spend enough time really, because you're getting like with your co-founders, you're getting into a relationship, and so they didn't spend enough time maybe sort of really talking through how is this going to work, what is decision, how will we make decisions, what happens when we disagree, those really basic things that end up can really end up killing things before I always say the highest potential failure mode of an early stage company are the dynamics of the founding team, because those things can blow up regardless of whether you can get intellectual property protection, whether there's a great market, whether you can get funding. It's those dynamics that really are such an essential core foundation to build upon, because that's going to help you persevere and make it through the inevitable sort of hurdles that you'll run into.
Oh, definitely, 100%. And while I was listening to your very interesting ideas, thanks so much, really, for sharing them. I was thinking that maybe this is the best time ever to, think about Silicon Valley and San Francisco. Why? Because a startupper basically needs issues and problems to fix and solve. This is a great time in terms of so many difficulties that we should solve. This is the time to invent, reinvent, imagine, and to reshape the future. And by the way, this is also the time when even real estate is going down in the area, hitting even 30%. So basically, if you want to see it on a different way, a year ago, a startupper who had an idea to come over here had to think to get that kind of money. Today, you need 30% less to find a place where to stay, or even less than that, because this is the time to build. You can now build when everything is full and overcrowded and overwhelmed. This is the time to start from scratch. So maybe this is the best time, in spite of seeing like big corps, and some of them are tech corps that better than me, are leaving San Francisco and Silicon Valley. Like, just to mention a few, Tesla, Oracle, HP, they're all going to Texas. I don't want to ask you why in terms of anything dealing with politics, but definitely it's interesting to understand why they're leaving. But
Yeah, so it's, I mean, one thing that's really interesting, particularly since 2000, there have been waves where big employers, be they tech or maybe more traditional large companies, have left Silicon Valley or the San Francisco Bay Area. But and one of those is that, the cost of doing business in California for those large employers is really high, relative to some of these other states. The other thing is that sometimes some of these other states put together amazing deals where if you're on the board or you're the CEO of one of these companies, you'd look silly if you didn't seriously consider that. I mean, for example, New York did this thing called Startup New York, and if you moved your company there, you got a 10% tax-free, deal. So that happens. But guess what? There are new companies that came in to fill those gaps, and so I never have, I just, that doesn't alarm me when I see those things moving, those companies moving out, because something comes back, something else comes in to fill what they've left. Because, where Tesla was, or is in Silicon Valley, it used to be a big Toyota plant. So Toyota left because it was more expensive. It was, less expensive, wherever they moved outside of California. But then we got Tesla, right? So I just, I just don't see that as a huge concern. And I think that at a certain size,
yeah,
the company has to do what's right by its shareholders, and if that's the right thing to do, that's the right thing to do.
wow,
But I
that's
think, I think that um, it's interesting, in terms, one of the things that we wanted to cover is sort of what are some of the COVID impacts, right? And and so corporates, with respect to innovation, one of the things that we're seeing is, I think corporates who have, in the sort of shock, initial shock of COVID, you can understand it, but then even these 9 months later, many corporates chose to go into, if you will, in some ways, pause mode, right? They're just managing status quo as much as possible. And people are making some very hard decisions in companies big and small. So I say this respectfully, but as it pertains to innovation, I think that it's really dangerous for large corporations to just stand still, because actually, if they are just, in their minds, acting in status quo, they're actually moving backwards, because
yeah, yes,
startups, this is an era where startups will leapfrog, um, large corporations in terms of their capabilities. And so the last thing you want to do as a corporation in this, our era of ever increasing sort of technological change, the last thing you want to do is go backwards. And so that, I think, is a real danger. There have definitely been, although they are the minority, there are definitely large corporations that are taking some actions, and and they will pull ahead of their of the pack in terms of their some of their direct competitors. And the other reason, that I think in this environment of COVID, the other thing that I would be focusing on in a larger company is really engagement with startups for innovation, but also with talent. both your current talent and continuing education, professional development, but also with universities and people who have recently graduated. There is some fabulous talent out there that could be, your best form of innovation to bring those new ideas and perspectives
Yes.
into your organization. And I think you can do that in some really creative ways these days.
Yeah.
And so I think some of the corporates who are focusing on talent and innovation will really be better positioned than their competitors.
That's wonderful. Sandra, really, I want to thank you so much because personally, I can say you made my day, and I hope this happened to everybody because these days it's all about gloomy atmosphere and confusion. And basically, you shared some great insights, not just to be, let's say, uh, um, optimistic by design, but you actually let me see that there is a great silver lining, and you shared some data set showing that we realized better than that the Silicon Valley area, San Francisco Bay Area, has some common attitude, which is about reinventing, which is about embracing failure as a value to thrive, to do better. And really, thank you so much for your thoughts. And this gives us, an idea to not let us be like, in a give up mode, but to keep, understanding. Even what you said about the big corps or big techs moving, um, they go. I like the image. Before Tesla, it was Toyota. Imagine now there is a big spot for the new ones
Yeah.
out there. Out there. Some of you have new ideas, also thinking how to make a better world. Really, now we must make a better world. It's not just rhetoric because of COVID-19 and whatever the impact will be. So it's time to reinvent, to imagine. So really, thank you so much for sharing your point of view. And I'm sorry that we started a little bit late because of technical issues, but you see, humans are not stoppable when they have desire and they're eager to make things happen, even if tech is not working.
Yeah, so we just did basically a podcast, and I'm sorry I
Yeah,
couldn't get my camera working. I mean, I look really good, I got my hair on, I got real clothes on. I'm not doing this in my pajamas. But anyway, it's really a pleasure to talk with you, Mauro, as always. And
thank you so much.
yeah, I think I think there's a lot of good stuff that that can happen, and we are all, I'm not. I know, we're all dealing with some real interesting challenges. I know the last thing I want to do is make it sound like, oh, nothing's wrong, or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, we
Definitely.
will absolutely make it through.
Definitely. And since we are entering the holiday seasons, of course, I want to share with you my merry holidays to you and your dear ones and all your friends and entrepreneurs and startuppers, everybody there. But also, as you were saying really nicely, that because of technology, you couldn't be there and that you took care of yourself. But that's a good message to have, guys. Who is going to take care of the beauty? We need to take care of ourselves first and foremost. Don't be just in pajamas. Go out there. There's something that we can make happen, starting from taking care of ourselves. So thank you so much, Sandra, and I hope to see you soon.
All right, thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye. Thank you.